Come on, Zoom, cooperate.
Ready when you are.
I'm not onto Zoom yet. It was updating. Can I have 1 minute?
I guess we're gonna wait for Nikki 1 minute while hers is loading up.
I'm in the guest room.
Nikki, do you mind if I get us started while you're
Go
logged?
ahead.
Okay, thank you. I want to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. We are gathered this evening to discuss the search firm for our superintendent. I want to thank board members for getting their scores in to our team. I want to thank Mike Herding and Jesse for working to make sure that we can coherently have this conversation this evening. Mike is going to kind of walk us through what we need to walk away from this conversation with this evening and the decisions we need to make. This shouldn't take us an incredible amount of time because really we're determining not who our search firm will be, but which search firms of the 4 that applied or the 4 that submitted proposals we would like to interview in the coming weeks. And with that said, I want to thank Mike Herding for joining us and for supporting us in this work. He came on very recently as the liaison to the board's superintendent search and has been working tremendously hard since, you know, he started working with us, including crafting the tool that we use to score our proposals this evening. So without further ado, Mike Herding, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for those kind comments. It's a pleasure to be back working with everybody. Good evening, board members, and good evening those viewing this tape. I first want to just thank the board for the careful work that they've done in beginning the search process for a new superintendent. Such important work, and appreciation for getting your scoring forms in so that we can talk about the search firms that have submitted proposals. I'm very excited that we do have strong proposals. So just to do a quick recap for those that might be watching this meeting, the Board of Education reviewed the previous, and I'm going to use the term RFP, that means request for proposal for a superintendent search, and reviewed the last one and made refinements to it. The RFP was sent out and it was due on March 24th. And you'll find that RFP posted on the district's website in the very near future. We received 4 RFPs from vendors who complete superintendent searches, and the board has carefully reviewed those proposals. The next step will be for the board to interview the search firms, and that will take place next week. Following that, the board will close session and make a decision and let people know about that. Following that, once a contract has been issued, the board will have their first meeting with the consultant, and that will be an open session. And then the timeline will be developed in working with the consultant. Our board is committed to transparency and communicating with the public on this search. And while the board makes the important decision of who to hire, stakeholder input has been and will always be so important, both to the board. And so we look forward to the input that our community is going to provide. So the first opportunity for that input will likely be input sessions on developing the leadership profile for our next superintendent, which helps the board and the search firm to know what we are seeking in the next leader for the Madison Metropolitan School District. I say that with pride. I worked for MSD a long time, and I love the district, and I've been very excited to do this work. We have 2 purposes for tonight. We're going to determine which search firms we want to bring in for interviews. And secondly, we'll talk about the interview process and begin a discussion of the questions we want to ask the search firm. So now moving forward to talk about the proposals, I would remind the board of 2 important points. We cannot refer to the firms by name. Please use the letters J, K, L, and M And be cautious that the statements you make do not allow identification of any of the firms. And a reminder, you will have a closed session after the interviews to further discuss the firms and make a decision. So for those introductory comments, I'll turn this over to President Muldrow for a discussion of the firms. My suggestion is that you go through each firm and share some general observations that you had with the proposal and perhaps thoughts that you had on this firm's fit with MMSD. So I'll stop talking and I'll turn it over to President Muldrow.
Oh, I was just gonna say Title VI. but I-
And just remind that when we talk about specific characteristics of that search firm partners, that we keep it in general of talking about diversity and inclusiveness rather than specific race. That's also important. So with no further ado, President Muldrow.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you starting us off by emphasizing the way that the community participates in the process of identifying our next superintendent. I want to do a round robin with board members where we get the opportunity to hear from everybody. I want to thank all of the vendors who submitted proposals for us to review. I thought all 4 of the proposals we got were competitive proposals that offered, a range of possibilities for how we can engage in this process. I will say I looked at how folks wanted to engage our community through this process as one of the key indicators of whether or not I thought a search firm was a good fit for Madison. I would like board members to comment on why you think search firms are a good fit. And also kind of what were the strengths you saw in proposals. I think I'll start with, I thought that Jay was an overwhelmingly polished, clear, and thorough proposal that to me really kind of rose to the top. Although I had one firm that was slightly higher than Jay. I thought K had an emphasis on community and inclusion that was really strong as well. And then L was actually what the firm that rose to the top for me and had the highest score. And it was, again, because they emphasized the community throughout their proposal, had a very polished and clear proposal, and also really spoke to how they've worked with communities and boards in the past to do this work. M had, kind of the most unique strengths in terms of the proposal. I thought that they were one of the more ambitious of the firms in terms of how they approach, both communicating around this process and the work more generally. And in my opinion, given my scores, I think the best fit for Madison would be firm J and firm L at this point, although I would be interested in interviewing firm J, K, and L at this time. I will pass to board member Gomez-Schmidt. After board member Gomez-Schmidt, I'd love it if we can hear from board member Castro. After board member Castro, I'd like it if we could hear from board member Simkin, and then board member Pearson, and then board member Vandermeul, and you'll close us out for tonight. Board member Nichols is not able to join us, but she did email her scores. And so I will speak to those after we hear from the board members who are present this evening. Board member Gomez-Schmidt, you want to get us started?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for sharing your observations as you worked through the proposals to get us started. Looking at the, evaluation criteria that we were using, we were really looking at the organizational capabilities and, the deliverables was a huge part of this, and how the organizations are going to work with our community, with the board, and the larger community to really figure out how to move through this process to find the best fit for a leader for the district moving forward. When looking at the proposals, I thought they all had different strengths that they brought. There were 2 that that rose to the top for me, which were firm J and firm L, I would say. I think the experience with the K-12 searches and the really robust proposals around community engagement were really important, and they showed a lot of expertise in their networks across the country and the work that they've done to place superintendents in a lot of different sizes and a lot of different types of school districts, but a lot of experience in urban districts, as well as large districts, small districts, medium districts. One of the things I noticed, a couple of these firms really focus on developing a leadership profile when they are working with the communities to get that feedback in what the community is looking for in a superintendent. I thought one also really stood out in looking also at developing a position description and competency requirements for the positions. So moving a little bit more in depth for providing both leadership profile and then actually focusing on the work that we want the superintendent to do for the district. I also felt there was one firm that did bring a different lens beyond the traditional K-12 search. I thought what was unique about that one was that there was, a candidate matrix and leadership assessments that were included. And that was unique from that perspective. And let me see. I think that's all I have to share at the moment. I guess I would be interested. One of the things I'd like to figure out is at what point we consider the cost in this process. I think there are 3 firms that I would be interested in interviewing, but I'm wondering if cost is a huge difference when we would consider that in the process. I don't know, Mike, if you have an answer for that or.
Yeah, I think that would be something that we would talk about after we interview all 3 of them.
Okay.
This is such important work, and I think you'll have more information after you interview them. It will help perhaps crystallize that just a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, then I also would share the opinion that interviewing firm J, L, and K would be a good way to move forward.
Thank you, Board Member Gomez Schmidt. Board Member Castro.
Thank you. Yeah, when I was going through the scoring, I was paying particular attention into how the vendors talked about and articulated a philosophy and how they engage the community, the board, teachers, administrative leaders, and more, and just what was important to the vendor in that process. And looking at that, the ones that rose to the top for me were J, K, and L. Particularly J articulated a very thorough philosophy and how and why they engage the community and how that relates to a candidate profile and their recruitment strategy. I thought K and L had some really impressive experience in helping districts of all sizes, including ours. And then finally, I thought J and K had really extensive and articulated plans for the transition and onboarding for a new administrator. Let's see what else. In the interview process, I would be interested in learning more about how these firms, JK and L, at least for me, the ones that rose to the top, would handle, or I think what I thought was missing at least was how they want to translate the candidate profile into a job description or into performance expectations. I think that's something that could be laid out a little bit more clearly. And yeah, those are my thoughts going forward.
Thank you so much, Board Member Castro. Board Member Simkin?
Thank you. When I was looking at proposals, I was looking for just a clear understanding of the process that we would be engaging in with each of the different firms, along with how they would embrace and lift up diversity within the process. And in addition, how they plan to engage our community. And then I guess the last piece that I was really interested in was if they had significant experience working with similar school districts as well. And so using that lens, I would also say that all 4 of the proposals were excellent. 3 really rose to the top in those categories, and then maybe 2 I'd be interested in interviewing. I thought that Firm J, as many of you have said, was really articulate and able to paint a really clear picture of exactly what we would be engaging in and what behind them. And it felt very well matched to what I believe that we're looking at as important. Firm L as well had just tremendous, Firm L, I would say, had tremendous experience doing the work and is just really deeply engaged in hiring superintendents. I'm just gonna see here this code, but Firm K actually rose a little bit higher to the top in my mind, along with J, because I felt like there was more space for us to really individualize the process for the unique community of Madison and engaging our community. And so with that in mind, I am most interested in moving forward in interviewing Firm J and Firm L.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Simkin. Board Member Pearson? Or actually, I
We're
don't.
back in.
Okay. Board Member Vandermeulen, if you want to go, then let Maya get back in.
Absolutely. I love all 4 proposals were very detailed, which I love. As someone who reads a lot of them, what really drives me nuts is when people do a proposal and don't answer half the questions. It's just something that's always bugged me. So I'm glad that everything was done well. 2 really rose to the top. L and J are my 2 top ones. J because of the absolute detail and focus on the little details. And L because L with the experience, the ability to focus on the community, the ability to make decisions with the board. Having gone through this multiple times, I can tell you, if you don't have a search firm that is willing to do things with the board, it will be a struggle. And that's something I want to avoid at all costs. So although all 4 are good, my main ones I wish to interview would be L and J.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermeulen. Board Member Pearson?
They kicked her out again.
So in the absence of board member Pearson, I want to speak to board member Nichols' comments. So board member Nichols also thanked all four folks for submitting. And then let me get to what she thought as who's at the top. Oh goodness, I'm sorry, because I'm like, she doesn't necessarily have it letter coded the way that we're talking about it right now. So I just want to really make sure that I am translating her appropriately. And I see board member Pearson's back on. So board member Pearson, do you want to speak to who rose to the top for you? Why you think folks are a good fit and what the strengths of the proposals were? And I'll try to really quickly decode her email so that it fits into the letter scheme we're using.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. I have to keep my camera off because my internet is very unstable right now, so it keeps going in and out. I would say that there were 3 that rose to the top, and particular 2. And I think 1 is just had really focused on areas in which we kind of we're looking for as far as actually 3 of them rose to the top. They had really extensive working with other school districts. I thought was pretty important. And honestly, from what I could hear from most of my colleagues was very similar to how I felt about those 3 in particular. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and Ollie. Sorry, because it's starting to freeze again. So I don't know if you guys can hear me.
We can still hear you, but I feel like I just want to make sure I've got what you're saying correct, Maya, which is that, are you saying that J and L rose to the top for you? Okay, I think I lost Maya. So I'm not sure if she was landing in a similar place. When I decoded Michelle's really quickly, and she sent a pretty thorough analysis of the 4 groups, and she spoke to each of them. She said she noticed some really nice features with group J, that it is women and minority owned, but wants to recognize that there's a significant price difference between J and some of the other firms. She noticed that L was used in a nearby community, and that they seem to have a pretty thorough understanding of this immediate area and have ties to this immediate area. They also reflected working with a range of districts from small to super large. And then K also has a lot of experience. Their network seems pretty expansive. So those are the 3 that rose to the top for board member Nichols. Of those 2, of those 3, her top 2 would be J and L, which is similar to what I heard from other board members. So if I were to summarize what I think I heard from most people is there were 3 that really rose to the top for most of us, and that is J, K, and L. I heard from Chris Gomez-Schmidt, myself, Savian, Laura, Nikki, Nichelle, that I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. So Jay was in the running for the top 2 for Chris, myself, Savian, Laura, and Nikki Vandermeulen. L was in the top for Chris Gomez-Schmidt, myself, Savian, Laura Nikki and Nichelle, Laura, and Savian also seem to be open to interviewing Kay.
I would prefer J and L for interviewing.
Okay, so that means that I think Savian and board member Nichols, or board member Castro and board member Nichols are the two board members who would be interested in doing an interview with Kay. But right now, the two who have risen to the top most saliently among board members are J and L. If folks are comfortable with us using that conversation and my synthesization of that conversation to, or my synthesizing of that conversation to move forward in terms of how we've determined who we're going to interview, then I think we can move into the interview process. But I just want to make sure folks are comfortable with what I heard most pronounced is that we want to interview J and we want to interview L. There is openness from multiple board members to interview K. Can I just do a quick go around and make sure that everybody's comfortable with that? Board member Gomez Schmidt.
What exactly are you asking?
I'm asking if we move forward with interviews with J and L, because that's where the majority of the board landed. If you agree with that, or if you would prefer that we do interviews with J, L, and K.
I think one of the difficulties I'm having with narrowing it down to two is that I think the cost factor has to be considered, and I don't know how to do that before we get to the interviews. And so that's just my concern, is that if we narrow it down to two here, and then we really have to eliminate one because of something, that we have just one choice, right? And maybe that's okay. But Mike, do you have a suggestion on that?
No, I just wanted to point out that, we did enter these scores this afternoon, and given the closeness of the two, it probably is the safest path for the board to interview three, even though I'm hearing some that want to interview two, but if that would be my recommendation. But as always, it's your decision as the board, and I respect that.
Chris, I greatly appreciate you speaking to kind of the difference in the proposals and why we might want to have a broader option in terms of who we're interviewing. I am open to interviewing all three, and I want to recognize that board member Nichols didn't pick one of the two that the majority of the board is speaking to as her top two. So that also makes me lean towards interviewing all three. Board member Castro? And then board member, your hand.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that point, I do think there could be value in interviewing all three. I think there was promise in all three, and would like more opportunity to ask questions and get that fit right.
Thank you. Board member Vandermeulen.
Yes, I think there's value in interviewing the two, J and L. I don't believe in giving false hope. I believe that the scores were the highest on those two. And I think those two have both given us excellent proposals. I think those are the two that are best for interviewing. This is not to say anything is wrong with number J, just that based on the closeness of the scores, I think J and L are the two that I would like to interview.
Thank you, board member Vandermeulen. Board member Simkin.
I'm appreciating what board member Gomez Schmidt said about the price, and that we could then be looking at two options that have really different price points. I'm also looking at the scores and knowing that the price point is already factored into the score. I think it's notable that the highest priced proposal is still the highest price score, even after having the deductions for price. I don't object to interviewing all three. I don't feel like I need to do that. But I would go into it in an open-minded way if we decided to.
I greatly appreciate that, Board Member Simpkin. Board Member Pearson? And I apologize if you are a little confused about where we're at right now. I'm happy to kind of explain where we're at in the process.
Yeah, if you can just let me know really quick. Because I just came back in, and again, I apologize. I'm just not having the best connectivity.
So we have, I heard from the board that there were two that kind of rose to the top. I'm now hearing from the majority of board members that there's an openness to interviewing all three, although I want to respect that Nikki Vandermeulen, board member Vandermeulen, did say she prefers sticking with just the kind of two who rose to the top. I'm curious if you would be more interested in interviewing two or three, and if so, who are the two or who are the three?
I mean, I'm open to doing three if necessary. I think two, depending, like based off the time that we, like the time frame that we need this to be done, and based off of what it seems like the scores and the conversation that I was able to gather so far right now, I would say two would be fine, but if three need be. And I missed some of the conversation around like exactly like where folks were kind of landing as the highest places. So I'll go back and review, but at this time, then I would say like two or three is fine.
I think because folks have expressed an openness to two, and because board member Nichols is not actually able to participate in this conversation fully, and did have a different top two than the majority of the board, I am recommending that we move forward with three. And I greatly appreciate the board members who feel very firm in their top two, being willing to go into this with an open mind, and being willing to interview a third person, so that we, can make sure every member of the board's voice is heard throughout this process. That being said, I think we're ready to kind of move through the conversation around the interview process. And so, Mike, if you want to kind of take us through what those interviews will actually look like, and board members can get questions to you to build the tool and build the interview process, that would be incredibly helpful at this time.
For the discussion about the proposals, I appreciate hearing your perspectives, and also just really respect the thought that's being given to this most important process. So for reference, the last time when we invited the search firms for interviews, each vendor prepared a 15-minute presentation. And I want to note that that presentation was prepared specifically for MMSD, based upon some of the areas that you as board members are interested in exploring in more detail, rather than say an individual firm's typical presentation that they give to a board. It was tailored to MMSD. And that went on for a maximum of 15 minutes. We did send questions to the search firm to help them guide the presentation. And you do have those questions as a handout. And that then helps drive the search tool. And then after the 15-minute presentation, we allowed for a 35-minute question and answer period to further engage with the search firm and ask for any clarification. And so each firm then had, it was close to about 50 minutes, when maybe a little over, but that's what we did last time. I bring it to you for your reflection. One thing I do want to point out is I thought it was very helpful when we asked them to tailor their presentation for what they've learned about MMSD versus their usual presentation. I'll turn it back over to you, Ali, to guide the discussion now.
Mike, thank you for that description. I want to ask board members now to consider how we want to either change the interview process, enhance the interview process, or participate in generating questions. So last time we were able to send questions to Mike and have him kind of consolidate questions that were within the same theme, create categories for them, and then use those questions as part of the interview process. We also asked for no more than a 15-minute presentation, which I think I personally would like to continue to include the presentation from all of the vendors we interview. I also would like board members to each submit questions and see if we can really kind of tease out what we're looking for. Each of you should have in front of you the questions that were asked last time of our search firm and the categories that they belong to. The other thing I would like to do is add the opportunity for the search firm to ask the board 2 questions. I think it's important to kind of have a little bit of give and take and exchange. And so I think that we missed an opportunity in our last search to have a better understanding of how, the firms would communicate with us by not giving them an opportunity to engage directly with the board and ask the board questions about what we want the process to be like. That's my suggestion. I will do a round robin again. This time, if it's all right, I would like to start with board member Castro, although our board member Castro, it kind of looks like you're chewing, so my bad.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I would appreciate inviting them to do a 15-minute presentation. And yeah, I guess I'd like, no more than 7 questions that we each ask, I guess. And we send them to Mike for synthesis.
I'm sorry, board member Castro, you said a specific number of questions from each board member. How many questions did you just say?
I guess I'm sorry. I meant 7 questions total from the board.
Okay, so each board member would submit one question then, and then we'd see kind of how those questions can be consolidated or collapsed or put into categories.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, board member Castro, for going first. Board member Vandermeulen, will you kind of talk to what you want from the interview process?
One, I want as transparent a process as possible. 2, I love the 15-minute tailored presentation is necessary because we're a unique district. 3, what I'm really want is a specific question on transparency, and I don't think it needs to be synthesized. I need to make sure that they're willing to work with the entire board, not just administration, not just part of the board, but the entire board. Because that way there'll be no doubt, because our public has been asking on transparency. Our public has been asking if everyone is equally involved. I don't believe equally is the right word. It should be equitably. But I'm quoting what I hear. So to be 100% honest, I think that the transparency one should be an add-on to the other 7, and I don't care who asks it. To be 100% honest. But otherwise, I'm good with it.
Ollie's screen is frozen. For a moment, I thought she was deep. It just.
Yeah, I thought she was deep in thought.
I like that color on you.
It's like she's not in.
Yeah, should we wait for her to get, it should only take a minute for her to get back in.
My allergies are going nuts, so that's why I'm asking.
Understand.
texting. There she is.
We're back. Almost back.
We'll see, is she back in?
She's gone again.
Down again.
She was.
Oh. Hey. Yeah, I could do that, certainly. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, we're gonna try this.
Board Member Vanderbilt, I heard you speak to wanting to keep the 15-minute presentation. Did not hear what you said in terms of questions from the board.
The question for the board has to be on transparency, because that's what the public keeps asking about, is how we are going to make this a transparent process. I think that should be an 8th question and should be synthesized, because I need to know that they will work with the community as much as they work with the board, as much as they work and are open with administration, so that we have a clear communication strategy between the sides.
Yes. Thank you for speaking for the community as part of what you want to see reflected in the questions. I guess what I'm going to ask Board Member Vanderbilt is that you submit a question to Mike Herding that is specific to transparency and accountability to the community. And I think, you know, board members can use questions to emphasize different priority areas and areas of focus throughout the interview process.
Okay.
But thank you so much for speaking both to the presentation and to the questions. Board member, I'm gonna call on board member Simpkin to talk through what you want from the interview process.
I agree with having a presentation that is 15 minutes and specific to MMSD. I like the idea of limiting the number of questions that we submit just for simplicity's sake, but I don't think I could probably limit it for me to 1 without perhaps missing a couple of other priorities that I have. So I'd be happy to limit it to maybe 3 questions, and then I can hit all of my priorities and we can let Mr. Herding go ahead and synthesize that information there. And so, I mean, those would be my thoughts around it.
Thank you for speaking to that, board member. And I guess, do you mind if I ask you to think about what your 3 priority areas would be?
In this process, my 3 priority areas, this is off the top of my head, so hopefully I'll still think this in the morning. 1 will be a commitment to diversity, including looking for candidates in perhaps unique or strategic ways to bring forward candidates that may not volunteer themselves as part of a pool, but are quite qualified to do this work. Another priority is going to be around the engagement process with our community and making sure that we have a profile that matches what our community is looking for our superintendent. And when I think of a third priority, I think it's going to be, for me, I think it's going to be having a relationship with this firm that we'll be working with for a little while that is rather seamless and easy for us on both ends, both on the end of the firm and on our end, to be able to work together very collaboratively in going through this process. So those are sort of the three overarching areas that I would be looking for.
Thank you so much for speaking to those, and thank you so much, Board Member Gomes-Schmidt, for letting me use your phone to take this meeting.
No worries.
I'm gonna try to jump back on right now and facilitate that instead of the phone, but Chris, I may call you back if I get kicked off again.
Okay, that sounds good.
That being said, Chris, are you, Board Member Gomes-Schmidt, are you prepared to kind of talk through what you want through the interview process?
Yes. All right, can you hear me okay? Board President Muldrow? All right. So I guess when I was thinking about this, and I really like the idea of the 15-minute presentation where we get to hear from their perspective about what they learned about MMSD and how they can help us through the search process. I guess I was thinking of this more in terms of more information that I want to know from them about how their experience in handling specific parts of the search. And so, like Board Member Castro mentioned, and I mentioned when I was talking about the strengths of some of these proposals, is about the candidate profiles that they talk about helping create with the community. Very interested in how they move those from a profile into a job description. And I think I would like to know that from them. I would like to know how, if they have experience in how they handle internal and external candidates, if they are both available to us, and how that is part of the process. I would like to know their experience in recruiting candidates, if there is a candidate that the board or the search firm has identified, going out specifically to talk to that person versus waiting for someone to apply, right? And if they have experience in doing that, if the board wants that as an option. And then timeline. I mean, we talked about this with the RFP, the timeline that we're under and what the possibility is for hiring a superintendent before the next school year starts versus it taking longer. So I would sort of like to hear from the firms what they believe based on their expertise are the pros and cons of sort of two different timelines. And just, I think for both of them, I think for all of the firms that we are considering interviewing, they have all spoke to the importance of community engagement, and they all have spoken to their networks and ability to identify a diversity of candidates for us to consider. So I see that as important too, but I see them all having that strength.
Board Member Gomes-Schmidt, thank you so much for outlining, what you're hoping we get from this interview process. And I think, how that informs the question that you craft. I will say, I think that folks may be thinking of one question as particularly limiting, but questions can have multiple sentences. They can be, it can be an in-depth singular question,
Right.
As well as being multiple questions. So I just want to throw that out to folks, so that folks don't shy away from having a singular, very in-depth question. Because I think there's, if you look to those 4 categories of questions. Some of those 4 categories in the last search included multiple questions. And there was a lot of depth in terms of what board members were looking for from search firms in terms of answers.
And I think there might be overlap as we all try to craft the interest areas. And so we may be able to cover it all, just based on the fact that that everybody sort of has overlapping questions that they want answered. So maybe in giving those to Mike, like he can decipher and figure out, you know, exactly what number of questions sort of cover all of that.
Absolutely. And I do think one of the things we might want to do before we adjourn this evening is board members say what question they're the most interested in taking on personally. And so I'm hearing that I think there are some themes. I think all of us want to talk about diversity and inclusion and equity. I think all of us want to talk about the relationship that the firm will have with the board and what that'll look like. It's just who's taking responsibility for writing that question, so we don't land with 7 questions about diversity or 7 questions about relationships. But thank you, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt. Board Member Pearson, are you able to join in the conversation around what you want the interview process to be like?
Yeah, I think if each board member submits like 2 or no more than 3, but like 1 to 3 questions that they would like to use, and then having Mike kind of synthesize those questions into, I agree. I think having way too many questions is not the best. But if we have like 7 or 8 or condense them into that would be great. I also think the presentations, I'm fine with the presentations. I don't know if it's necessary for presentations, but I'm open to it if the consensus of the board comes to say, or a majority of the board comes to that understanding. Yeah, so that's kind of like my thoughts on that as far as the questions and possible presentations.
Thank you, Board Member Pearson. I am going to ask people to go around and identify 2 questions that they would want to ask, not the exact questions, but what you're the most interested in crafting a question about. And so I'll start with Board Member Vandermeulen. Board Member Vandermeulen, I heard you say transparency. Would you be interested in crafting a question around transparency?
I would. The other topic is special education, but I can trust that you guys can all get that in, so I'll do the transparency one.
Thank you so much, Board Member Vandermeulen. Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, do you have a specific question in mind that you would like to speak to?
Well, I guess one of my questions is are we able to get any additional information from the search firms before they come back and give the 15-minute presentation or whatever? I mean, could we ask them to submit some more information on, you know, their recommended timeline or any of that? I'm just wondering if that would allow us more time to interact with them. I don't know if that's possible or not.
Well, I think we're asking them to create a presentation tailored to Madison
By next week.
by next week. So I think we want to be careful we're not asking for too much.
Okay.
I think we're best to ask them to include kind of those areas that we want to make sure they address.
Okay. I guess then around process, you know, in the things that I mentioned.
We
Holly, we're not hearing you come through. All right.
Hey, board member Gomez-Schmidt, I'm sorry about that. I heard Mike say, you know, we want to limit what we're asking them from.
Yep.
So do you want to speak to the question you would want to ask, and do you mind putting me on speaker? I
Yep,
can hear
you're-
the whole group from where you're sitting.
Yeah, you're already on speaker, so, yeah, I think, some of those process questions, and I can't craft it off the top of my head, but some of those things about, you know, the candidate profile, the job description, the timeline, some of those process oriented things, I can craft something around that.
Thank you so much, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt. Board Member Castro, can you speak to what you would want? We have process, we have transparency as questions we want to ask. Do you have an area that you want to ask about specifically?
Initially, I wanted to ask about methods of community engagement, but I wonder if that kind of touches on process. If so, then I would like to talk about how they want to convert the candidate profile into a job description and performance expectations.
Thank you so much for taking on those questions, Board Member Castro. Board Member Simpson, you kind of outlined your 3 areas, which were, you know, engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and relationship with the board. Is there one of those areas you really want to hone in on and author the question for?
I would be happy to focus in on the DEI question.
Thank you, Board Member Simpson. Board Member Pearson, is there a question you'd really like to hone in on?
There are questions that I have, but I'll just email them.
Board Member Pearson, I think I agree with the list that Board Member Simpson came up, and I'd be happy to talk about or to write a question and submit questions specific to how the search firm will relate to the board throughout the process, around kind of, you know, what our expectations of one another will be and what our communication will look like throughout the process with the firm. So I'm happy to cover that area. I heard from the majority of the board that we want to keep the 15-minute presentation, that we want to engage in a Q&A. I think I'm the only board member who advocated that we give search firm the opportunity to ask us questions. And so since I'm not seeing a large interest in that from the rest of the board, I think we're looking at a process that looks very similar to the last time we did this search. Is there any further discussion? And Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, do you mind telling me who's got their hands up since I can't see y'all?
Yes. Anyone? Mike?
Thanks, Mike.
I just want to make sure that before we go, we make sure that we're deciding whether we're going to interview all 3 on the Thursday or do 2 on Thursday, 1 on Friday. One of the search firms did express that they could do it on Friday and would prefer that. So I don't know if this fits in right now with what you want to talk about, but I didn't want us to go away without covering that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for reminding us about kind of where search firms are landing specifically. Recording in progress. Is there any further discussion from board members? I think I can see you all now.
Hold on, I took you off speaker there for a second. Okay, can you hear us?
So in summary, I think what we came up with was that the majority of the board definitely wants to interview vendor J, vendor L. The board is open to interviewing vendor K as well. So we're looking at 3 interviews. Each board member will submit no more than 3 questions. Right now, the areas that we know board members are going to ask questions about are transparency, process, engagement, relationships, and I'm sorry, Board Member Castro, can you say what you wanted to ask about one more time?
Yeah, methods of community engagement and converting the uh, candidate profile into a job description.
Okay, methods of community engagement and converting. So to me, that sounds like we really have a pretty good outline of what we're going to be asking about, and everybody knows what question they're working on. Mike, if board members start crafting their questions this evening, when do you need those by?
I would like to would ideally like to have them tomorrow so that I can do the synthesizing and reaching out on Friday. I hope that that's a reasonable timeline.
I think that that means we should probably adjourn and folks should start working on these questions and get them to you this evening or tomorrow morning.
You
I'm
know,
seeing- I'm
Friday
seeing-
morning at the latest. I have to keep you on task though.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
You
thank
got
you.
it, sir.
Hey, I ask one question really quickly,
Yes, who are you directing the question at, Chris?
at Mike. Mike, you mentioned potentially breaking up the interviews into two. Although we're talking about them giving us a 15-minute presentation, do we anticipate that each interview will take like around an hour
Yeah.
from like with all the questions and,
Yes,
okay,
I still don't have closure on.
how many we're interviewing?
No,
Okay.
we're interviewing three. I
Okay.
understand that. Do you want to do two on the Thursday? And one on Friday, or do you want to go through all three of them on Thursday?
Is this next week?
Yes,
Yes.
those were the 2 days that I believe the board had already talked about setting aside.
I would rather do two on Thursday rather than two on Friday.
Absolutely, on Thursday.
I agree with that.
On Thursday. Thursday being tomorrow or next Thursday?
Next week.
Next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for getting that clarified. I'm in agreement with what Board Member Simpkins said. Any further discussion around next steps? All right, so we will move forward with interviewing the three firms. Mike will reach out to let those search firms know we're interested in interviewing them in person. We will each craft a question specific to the themes we named this evening. And then we will hear a presentation from all of the vendors, and so will the community in open session next week. And we will also interview and question them during open session next week. If there is no further discussion, and I don't want to rush folks, so if there's still things we want to clarify, please just chime in. But if there is no further discussion, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you,
everybody.
Is there a second?
Second, Chris.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Everybody have a nice night. Mike will get you questions quickly.